once a month or so, I do a little pilgrimage to the thrift stores in town looking for old games. And I'm not just looking for games that are cheap to purchase, but also I'm hoping to learn about games. So I'm hoping to see games that I didn't know about, and so I learn a little bit more about the history of gaming and about vintage games. Point Blank is a game that belongs to the category, so I was very happy when I found it in a local thrift store. I spent $2 buying it. It looked interesting, the components looked interesting. I counted the components before buying it. I always do that to make sure that everything is there. And well, after I bought it, I played with my daughter Amelia, who is now 7, and I can tell you, we had a good time. It's a super light, incredibly light game, probably too light for most players, regular, non-casual players out there, but it's a game that could work if you're playing it with children, and children playing it with each other. Point Blank is a 100% abstract game. It comes in this, it's played on this interesting board made of plastic, and each player has a set of identical pieces with an arrow on it, and that's pretty much what you get with the game. The instructions are very short, they're written on the back of the box. How does it play? The first player starts, you determine that randomly or any other way you want, and the first player takes one of their pieces and places it anywhere and with any orientation. Next turn, that player will have to place their arrow in the space that the previous arrow is pointing to, so you're reserving that space. And I can put it here, say next time I put my arrow there, that means the following turn I will have to go here, and then maybe here, and then the following turn here, I'll just be able to decide the orientation. You reserve the placement, turn in advance, the orientation you decide on the moment. Of course, the other player in the meanwhile is doing the same. It's also alternating, putting pieces down. Important restrictions. You cannot place a token. You cannot place a token in an area that another piece is pointing to, and you cannot point to another area that another piece is pointing to. That is, you cannot, when you add a new piece, point to an area that someone has reserved. My opponent has reserved that space the previous turn, so I can place it here, but I cannot put it in that direction. I would need to put it like this, for example, another orientation. Then next, the player places it here, must place it there, but cannot point to the direction that I reserved. So maybe instead the player wants to do this. And now I'm gonna do this, and the other player is gonna do this, and so on and so forth. Another interesting aspect is that you can loop around. You can loop around the board, but you can loop around the board, so you can exit from here and come back from here. You can exit from this edge and you come back from in the corresponding space on the other side of the same row or column, like in this way. Green is looping around and doing this. But you can only do it perpendicularly. You cannot loop diagonally. And this is pretty much the game. You alternate placing pieces on the board. Placing pieces on the board until one of the two players will not be able to place pieces again. And at that point, the player that cannot play one of the pieces loses the game, and the other player wins the game. Heck, I'm so into it. I just feel like I need to complete this solo game, which I will probably not, but just to give you a sense of the things that you can do in the game. Say from here, I'm looping there. So this is the game. Again, it's super light, it's super simple. I enjoy playing with my daughter. We played about 5 times, I believe, which is already, if I never played again, my $2 that I spent to buy this game where money were spent. It's super light, it's super simple. Playing it with children is interesting because to them the strategies are not obvious, and it teaches them about planning ahead, about thinking what the opponent might do, about thinking a couple of turns ahead, seeing things quote unquote not linearly. The fact that they had to keep into account the possibility of looping is very interesting, because my daughter sometimes looked frustrated when she thought she was completely boxed in, until she realized the possibility of looping, and then all of a sudden things opened up. You still have to think about things in advance, and you still have to take into account what the opponent is doing. So in that sense, to teach a little bit of extra thinking, sequential thinking, planning, I would even say theory of mind, they had to figure out where you're trying to go next. This works very well, and it's done with spatial logic, and that very often kids are good at. So I had a good time in playing it with my daughter. As playing it with adults, maybe, just because it's so simple. It plays in about 5 to 10 minutes, depending if you play a full game, that is, the game goes down to the last couple of pieces, or a player manages to win early. So it could be a nice light filler for casual players, non-regular players. It is true, after a while that you play, chances are, when players have figured out a couple of strategies, if they more or less are equally skilled, chances are that the game may go down to the last piece. And in which case, if if a player manages to put down all of the pieces, and the other player is left with one piece, that is, the board is entirely full but for one space, that means that the first player won. That is, if two players are really good at it, they figure out ways of quote-unquote breaking the game, then the game may become playable, because it just becomes the player that goes first. In that case, the player that goes first will always win. We are not at that point yet. There were times where I believe I would win, and then my daughter, somehow she surprised me and was able to take advantage of something that I had overlooked. So yes, it may be breakable. I believe there probably is a way of solving it and making it unplayable. But if you can find it around the thrift store for a couple of bucks, and maybe you're looking just to play for a couple of times as a light filler, as a warm-up game for a game night, or with a child, then I think this could be a good game. I'm glad that I found it, for a couple of reasons. First, I didn't know it, and now I know it. And knowing stuff to me is always more exciting than not knowing it, so I learned something new for $2, and that is great. And I have a game that I may not be playing very often. It may not be the crowning jewel of my collection, but it's a game that is pleasant enough, and as a light filler to play with my daughter from time to time is perfectly fine.